The room buzzed with forced laughter and the low murmur of conversations. These company parties had never been my thing, but Emily had begged me to come. "It's important," she'd said with a strained smile I hadn't recognized. I couldn't say no, not after everything that had been weighing on us lately. Over the last few months, something had shifted between us. At first, I chalked it up to stress, long hours at her marketing firm, the demands of our suburban life, the way routines can erode spontaneity. But tonight, standing in the middle of this crowded hall, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in my gut. Something wasn't right. I clutched a beer I wasn't drinking and scanned the room, my eyes moving past strangers until they landed on Emily. She was standing by the bar, her back turned to me, dressed in the navy dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. She looked stunning, her long brown hair cascading over her shoulders, but my admiration quickly turned to unease. She wasn't alone. A man stood close to her, too close for comfort. He was tall, dressed sharply in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. I watched as he leaned in, saying something in her ear that made her laugh. Not a polite laugh, the kind I'd heard her use at family dinners, but a real one, the kind that used to be reserved for me. Then her hand brushed his arm, lightly but deliberately, and my stomach tightened. This wasn't a harmless conversation. It was something else, something worse. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe he was a coworker. Maybe it was all perfectly innocent. But then why hadn't she mentioned him before? Why had she suddenly started taking her phone calls outside? Why had she seemed so preoccupied lately, her attention elsewhere even when we sat together on the couch? My grip tightened around the bottle in my hand. I wanted to march over there, introduce myself, and assert my presence, but my feet wouldn't move. I felt paralyzed, torn between confronting her and avoiding the truth that might shatter everything. My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden change in the room. The lights dimmed, and a voice boomed over the speakers, calling everyone's attention to the screen at the front of the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, "we'd like to present a year-end celebration of our accomplishments, highlighting the people who make this company great." The crowd turned toward the large projector screen as images began to flicker. Team outings, office parties, smiling faces. My eyes, however, stayed fixed on Emily. She hadn't moved from the bar. Her posture was stiff, her laughter gone, and she seemed hyper-aware of the people around her. I forced myself to look at the screen, hoping to distract my racing thoughts, but nothing could prepare me for what came next. The montage shifted. Instead of group photos, the footage showed a private dinner. My heart stopped. There was Emily, laughing, holding a wine glass as the man beside her leaned in. The video wasn't from the office. It was intimate, taken in a dimly lit restaurant, clearly not meant for public viewing. The man sitting across from her, pouring her wine, was the same one now standing by her side at the bar. My world began to tilt as the footage played on. The way his hand lingered on hers, the way they smiled at each other, it was unmistakable. The whispers in the room grew louder. I could feel the weight of 100 eyes shifting between the screen and Emily. Then came the final blow. The clip ended with them walking out into the parking lot, where he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a peck on the cheek or a quick goodbye. It was a kiss that left no room for doubt about what they were to each other. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the projector. I turned toward Emily, who was now standing motionless, her face pale. Her glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. The man beside her reached out to steady her, but she jerked away from his touch. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. Her expression was a mixture of panic and guilt, but there was no denying what I'd just seen. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was public, unfolding in front of her coworkers, and most painfully me. My chest tightened, and my pulse roared in my ears. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I couldn't find the words. All I could do was stand there, drowning in humiliation. "I can explain," she said, her voice cracking as she took a hesitant step toward me. Her words barely registered. I was too consumed by the whirlwind of emotions flooding my mind. Anger, heartbreak, disbelief. My hands clenched in a fist at my sides as I stared at her, the woman I'd built my life with, the woman who had just destroyed it in front of an audience. Explain what, Emily? My voice was low, trembling with the effort to stay calm. The room was still watching, a sea of faces filled with shock, pity, and thinly veiled curiosity. She opened her mouth to speak again, but no sound came out. The man, her lover, stood frozen a few feet away, looking like he wanted to disappear. For the first time in my life, I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, to escape the suffocating silence and the judgmental stares, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. Emily stood there, trembling, her eyes pleading with me to understand. But what was there to understand? The evidence was right there, flashing across that damn screen for everyone to see. Tom, she whispered, as though saying my name might somehow make this right. My name on her lips only made my stomach churn. I couldn't tell if I was angrier at her betrayal or the fact that she'd let it unravel like this, in front of a crowd. I forced myself to take a deep breath, though it felt like I was inhaling shards of glass. My voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried all the hurt I felt. How long? Emily flinched at the question. Her eyes darted to the floor, as if it might offer her refuge from the truth. The man, still standing awkwardly nearby, shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us, my voice rising with each word. How long, Emily? Weeks? Months? My anger bubbled to the surface, a stark contrast to her silence. Her hands wrung together, a nervous tick I hadn't seen in years, and she finally met my gaze. It's not what you think, she said, her voice trembling. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Not what I think? Then tell me what it is, because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what it is. You lied. You cheated. And now you're caught. The crowd, sensing the escalation, began to murmur more loudly. A few people had the decency to avert their gazes, but most watched intently, as though my pain was tonight's entertainment. The man, her co-worker, her lover, cleared his throat, attempting to say something, but I cut him off with a glare that could have frozen fire. Don't. You don't get to speak to me. He held up his hands defensively, his mouth snapping shut. Emily took another step toward me, her voice barely a whisper. Tom, please. Let's go somewhere private to talk. The audacity of her suggestion made me laugh, a hollow, bitter sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. Private? You want privacy now, after putting our lives on display for everyone to see? Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she looked as though she might cry. I wanted to feel pity for her, to find some shred of compassion in the wreckage of what we once had. But I couldn't. All I could see was the betrayal, the lies, the choices she'd made without me. I took a step back, distancing myself from her and the man who now hovered behind her like a shadow. I can't do this, I said, my voice breaking despite my best efforts to stay composed. Not here. Not now. With that, I turned on my heel and made my way to the exit, leaving Emily standing there in the ruins of her carefully constructed facade. The cold night air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside, but it was nothing compared to the icy knot in my chest. I didn't stop walking until I reached my car, parked at the far end of the lot. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys, my mind racing with a million questions I didn't have answers to. How had we gotten here? What had I missed? Was there a moment, some inflection point, where I could have stopped this from happening? I slid into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady myself. I couldn't go home. Not yet. Our house, the place we'd built our life together, suddenly felt foreign, tainted by the knowledge of what had been happening behind my back. Instead, I sat there, letting the silence of the empty parking lot envelop me as the weight of her betrayal sank in. I don't know how long I sat in the car, staring blankly through the windshield. The night stretched on, cold and unyielding, a perfect reflection of how I felt inside. My phone buzzed on the dashboard, snapping me out of my stupor. Emily's name lit up the screen, her picture, a candid shot of her laughing on our last vacation, mocking me. I didn't answer. What could she possibly say that would undo what I'd seen tonight? When the call ended, a text came through. Please come home. We need to talk. The audacity of her words made my chest tighten. She wanted to talk now? After weeks, maybe months, of sneaking around, of lies and late nights? The thought of going home and facing her was unbearable. Instead, I started the car and drove, the hum of the engine the only sound in the empty night. I didn't have a destination in mind. My hands moved on autopilot, guiding me through familiar streets. Before I knew it, I was parked in front of my brother's house. Matt had always been my anchor, the person I turned to when life felt too heavy to carry alone. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should even involve him in this mess. But as I sat there, staring at the warmly lit windows, I realized I couldn't do this alone. I stepped out of the car, my movement sluggish, and rang the doorbell. It was late, and I half expected him to ignore it, but after a moment, the door opened. Matt stood there, his face creased with confusion that quickly turned to concern when he saw me. "Tom, what's going on?" he asked. I didn't trust my voice, so I just shook my head and stepped inside. Matt led me to the living room, his wife, Sarah, peeking around the corner with a worried expression. "You want coffee? Something stronger?" he asked as we sat down. "Stronger," I muttered, my voice barely audible. He nodded and disappeared into the kitchen, returning with 2 glasses of whiskey. I took a long sip, letting the burn settle in my chest before I spoke. "It's Emily," I finally said. His brow furrowed. "What about her?" I stared at the glass in my hand, the words feeling heavy in my throat. "She's been cheating on me, Matt. I found out tonight. At her company party, of all places." His eyes widened in shock. "What? Are you sure?" I nodded, my grip tightening around the glass. "They showed a video. Her and some guy from her office. Everyone saw it. I don't even know what to do." Matt leaned back, running a hand through his hair as he processed my words. "Man, I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry, Tom. That's brutal." I let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, that about sums it up." Sarah appeared with a blanket, wrapping it around my shoulders like I was some fragile thing about to break. "You can stay here as long as you need," she said softly. I nodded, grateful for the offer, but unsure of what I really needed. What I wanted was impossible. I wanted to rewind time, to go back to when things were simple, when Emily and I were still us. But that was gone now, shattered by her choices. I stayed on their couch that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the night's events in my mind like a broken record. The morning light filtered through the blinds, and I felt no more rested than when I'd first closed my eyes. Matt was already up, sipping coffee at the kitchen table when I walked in. "Morning," he said, his tone cautious. I nodded, sitting across from him. "You talked to her?" he asked. I shook my head. "She called. Texted." I couldn't bring myself to respond. He gave me a sympathetic look. "What's your plan?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't even know where to start. Everything I thought I knew about my life is just gone." Matt sighed, leaning forward. "Look, you don't have to figure it all out right now. Take it one step at a time. But you can't avoid her forever, Tom. Eventually, you're going to have to face her." He was right, of course, but the thought of seeing Emily again made my stomach turn. What would I even say? What could she possibly say that would make this better? I stayed at Matt's for most of the day, letting the hours slip by in a haze. But as the sun began to set, I knew I couldn't hide forever. I needed answers, even if they weren't the ones I wanted to hear. Gathering my courage, I thanked Matt and Sarah for their support and headed home. The drive felt endless, my heart pounding harder with every mile. When I finally pulled into the driveway, Emily's car was there, a silent reminder of the life we'd shared. I sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the house. My house. Our house. And now, a place filled with ghosts. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the house, my legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. The porch light flickered faintly, casting long shadows across the lawn. I hesitated at the door, my hand hovering over the handle. Finally, I took a deep breath and pushed it open. The familiar scent of lavender, Emily's favorite candle, hit me immediately, and it felt suffocating. She was sitting on the couch, her head buried in her hands. When she heard the door close, she looked up, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Tom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The sound of my name coming from her lips sent a fresh wave of anger through me. "We need to talk," she started, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said, my voice cold. "Don't start with 'we need to talk.' We should have talked months ago, Emily. Before all of this." She winced at my words, as if they'd physically struck her. "You're right," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I should have told you. I didn't mean for this to happen, Tom, I swear. It got out of control." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Out of control? That's what you're calling it? Sneaking around, lying to my face, making a fool out of me. Out of us. That's just out of control to you?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. "Don't. You don't get to do that anymore." She dropped her hand, her shoulders slumping as fresh tears slid down her cheeks. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you, Tom." Her words, so hollow and inadequate, only stoked the fire of my anger. "Then why did you do it?" I demanded. "Why him? Why now? Was it worth it?" She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "It wasn't about him," she finally said. "It wasn't about anything you did or didn't do. I felt like I was losing myself. I don't know who I am anymore." Her voice cracked, and she buried her face in her hands again. But her tears did nothing to soften the ache in my chest. "You don't know who you are?" I asked, my voice rising. "So you thought you'd find yourself by destroying us?" She flinched again, but I didn't care. I couldn't stop the words spilling out of me. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you even care? You didn't just hurt me, Emily. You humiliated me. In front of your coworkers, in front of strangers. You've turned my life into a public spectacle." Her sobs grew louder, but I wasn't finished. "I trusted you. I believed in us. And you threw it all away for what? A fling? A few stolen moments with some guy who means nothing." She finally looked up, her face streaked with tears. "It wasn't nothing," she said quietly, and the admission hit me like a punch to the gut. I staggered back, the weight of her words almost too much to bear. "It wasn't nothing," I repeated, my voice hollow. "What does that even mean? You love him." She shook her head quickly, almost desperately. "No, I don't love him, but it wasn't just meaningless either. It was a wake-up call, Tom. I've been unhappy for so long, and I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to fix it." Her words made my blood boil. "So, instead of talking to me, you decided to cheat on me? That's how you fix things?" She broke down again, shaking her head as she sobbed. "I'm sorry," she whispered over and over. But her apologies felt empty. They couldn't undo the damage she'd done. I turned away from her, running a hand through my hair as I tried to steady my breathing. My mind was racing, each thought darker than the last. Could I forgive her? Should I? The life we'd built together, our house, our plans, our dreams, felt like a cruel joke now. But beneath the anger, there was a flicker of something else. Grief. Grief for what we'd lost, for the woman I thought I knew, for the life we'd never have again. When I finally turned back to her, she was watching me, her eyes red and swollen. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want to fight for us, Tom. Please." Her plea hung in the air, heavy with desperation. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could somehow fix this, that we could go back to the way things were before. But the images from that video were burned into my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental between us had broken. "I don't know if I can do this," I said finally, my voice cracking. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Emily." She nodded slowly, as if she'd been expecting that answer. "I understand," she said softly, "but I'm not giving up on us. Not yet." Her determination should have comforted me, but it only made the ache in my chest worse. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. The silence between us stretched on, heavy and oppressive. I couldn't look at her anymore. The woman sitting in front of me was a stranger now, someone I barely recognized. I stood up, needing to put distance between us before the anger and pain consumed me entirely. "I need some time," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "Tom, don't," I interrupted. I need to think. Without waiting for her response, I walked out the door and into the cold night air. The stars above me were bright and indifferent, a stark contrast to the chaos inside me. I didn't know where I was going, but one thing was clear. I couldn't stay here. I walked aimlessly down the quiet suburban streets, the chill in the air doing little to numb the storm raging inside me. Every step felt heavy, my mind racing with memories of Emily, the good, the bad, and everything in between. How we ended up here? We'd build a life together, a partnership that was supposed to weather anything. I thought back to the early days, when we'd laugh until our sides hurt and stay up late dreaming about our future. Those memories now felt like relics of a life that belonged to someone else. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me back to the present. I hesitated before pulling it out. Another text from Emily. I love you, Tom. Please come back. I shoved the phone back into my pocket, her words cutting deeper than I cared to admit. I found myself at a small park we used to visit together, back when things were simpler. The swings creaked softly in the breeze, and the faint glow of a street lamp bathed the area in pale light. I sat on a bench, staring at the empty playground, and let the weight of the night sink in. My mind kept replaying her words. It wasn't meaningless. What did that even mean? That it had been worth the destruction it caused? That it had been more than just a fling? The thought made my chest tighten. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and yet, beneath it all, there was still a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Was it hope? Anger? Love? I didn't know anymore. As the hours passed, I began to think about what Matt had said earlier. You can't avoid her forever. He was right. At some point, I would have to face this, to make a decision about what came next. But how could I decide when I didn't even know what I wanted? My thoughts drifted to the practicalities. Our home, our finances, the life we'd built together. Splitting all of that apart would be a logistical nightmare, but staying together felt impossible. The truth was, I wasn't ready to let go, but I didn't know if I had it in me to forgive her either. For the first time in my life, I felt completely lost. Eventually, the cold became too much, and I knew I couldn't stay on that bench all night. I dragged myself to my feet and began the slow walk back home, each step heavier than the last. When I finally reached the house, the lights were still on. I stood on the porch for a moment, staring at the door, before finally summoning the courage to go inside. Emily was sitting on the couch, her arms wrapped around herself, as if she were trying to hold herself together. She looked up when I entered, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. You came back, she said softly, as if she hadn't been sure I would. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat down across from her, leaving a chasm of space between us. The silence between us was deafening, but I didn't know how to break it. Finally, she spoke. I know I don't deserve another chance, she said, her voice trembling. But I need you to know that I love you, Tom. I've always loved you. Her words felt like a cruel joke after everything that had happened. But I didn't interrupt. I know I made a mistake. A huge, unforgivable mistake. But it didn't mean I stopped loving you. It was a moment of weakness, and I hate myself for it. I let her words hang in the air, unsure of how to respond. Did I believe her? Did it even matter? The damage was already done. What do you want from me, Emily? I finally asked, my voice weary. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting nervously. I want us to fix this, she said. I know it won't be easy, and I know it will take time, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just please don't give up on us. Her plea was desperate, but it only made me feel more conflicted. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that we could somehow rebuild what was broken. But another part of me, the part that couldn't forget the betrayal, the lies, wanted to walk away and never look back. I don't know if I can, I said quietly. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Her face crumpled at my words, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't blame you, she said. I've given you every reason to hate me. But I promise, Tom, I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you if you let me. Her words sounded sincere, but they did little to ease the ache in my chest. It's not that simple, Emily, I said, my voice breaking. You didn't just hurt me. You broke something inside me, something I don't know if I can put back together. She nodded slowly, as if she understood, but the pain in her eyes was clear. Just please think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. The truth was I didn't have any answers, not for her, not for myself. I need space, I said after a long pause. I can't figure this out with you hovering over me. I need time to think. She nodded again, her lips pressing into a thin line. Take all the time you need, she said. I'll wait. Her words felt like both a promise and a burden. I stood up and walked toward the stairs, pausing at the bottom step. Good night, Emily, I said quietly, not turning around. Good night, Tom, she replied, her voice barely audible. As I climbed the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what happened, things would never be the same again. I barely slept that night. The bed felt cold and unfamiliar, even though it was the same one we'd shared for years. Memories of happier times crept into my mind uninvited. The mornings we'd spent tangled in each other's arms, the late nights whispering about dreams we'd chased together. Those memories now felt like lies, tainted by the knowledge of what she'd done. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were chaotic and restless, filled with fragmented images of Emily and that man from the party. I woke before the sun, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a boulder. I needed to get out of the house, to clear my head. Throwing on a jacket, I slipped out the door without a word. The streets were quiet, the first light of dawn casting long shadows across the empty sidewalks. I walked aimlessly, my thoughts as jumbled as the leaves scattered across the pavement. Emily's words from the night before echoed in my mind. I'll wait. Take all the time you need. But what did that even mean? Time wouldn't erase the betrayal, and it wouldn't magically restore the trust she'd shattered. I passed a small coffee shop and decided to go in, hoping the warmth of a cup of coffee might help steady me. The barista greeted me with a cheerful smile, but I could barely muster a nod in return. As I sat at a corner table, staring into the dark liquid, I realized I had no idea what to do next. My phone buzzed on the table, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was Matt, my brother. I hesitated before answering, not sure if I was ready to talk. But I knew he meant well, so I picked up. Hey, Matt, I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. Hey, Mun, how you holding up? His concern was genuine, but the question felt impossible to answer. I don't know, I admitted. I'm trying to make sense of everything. Matt was quiet for a moment, then said, Look, I know you don't want advice, but if you need to talk, or if you just need a distraction, you know where I am. I appreciated his offer, but I wasn't ready to be around anyone. Thanks, Matt. I'll let you know. After we hung up, I stared at the phone in my hand, wishing it could somehow give me the answers I was searching for. As the hours ticked by, I found myself replaying every moment of the last few months, searching for signs I might have missed. The late nights at the office, the sudden need for privacy, the way she'd seemed distant, as if she were already halfway out the door. Had I been blind, or had she been that good at hiding it? The truth was it didn't matter. What mattered was where we went from here, or if there was even a we to salvage. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of laughter coming from the street outside. A couple walked past the window, their arms wrapped around each other, their smiles easy and carefree. The sight made my chest ache. Once upon a time, that had been us. I left the coffee shop and headed back home, though I wasn't sure why. Part of me wanted to stay away, to avoid the inevitable conversation with Emily. But another part of me knew I couldn't run forever. When I walked through the front door, the house was eerily quiet. Emily wasn't on the couch where I'd left her, and for a brief moment, I wondered if she'd left. But then I heard faint movement upstairs. I stood in the foyer, debating whether to go to her or retreat to the guest room. Before I could decide, she appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes red and puffy from crying. Tom, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Can we talk? I wanted to say no, to tell her I wasn't ready. But the truth was, I didn't think I'd ever be ready. Fine, I said, my voice clipped. She came down the stairs slowly, as if she were afraid of breaking whatever fragile thread was keeping us tethered. We sat in the living room, a chasm of space between us. She wrung her hands nervously, her eyes darting between me and the floor. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her voice trembling, "about what I've done, about what I've put you through. And I know there's nothing I can say to make it right. But I need you to know that I hate myself for what I did. I hate that I hurt you." Her words hung in the air, but they did little to soothe the raw wound she'd left in my heart. "What do you want from me, Emily?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "I want a chance to fix this," she said. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway. I love you, Tom. I've always loved you, and I'll do whatever it takes to prove that to you." Her plea was desperate, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of the woman I'd fallen in love with. But it wasn't enough. "Not yet. I don't know if I can believe you," I said honestly. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." She nodded, as if she'd expected that. "I understand," she said, "but I'm not giving up. Not on us." Her determination both frustrated and confused me. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that we could somehow rebuild what she'd broken. But another part of me, the part that replayed that video on an endless loop in my mind, knew it wasn't that simple. "You don't get to decide that, Emily," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "You don't get to choose whether we stay together. That's my decision, too." She flinched at my words, but she didn't argue. "You're right," she said softly. I hope you'll give me the chance to earn back your trust." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The truth was, I didn't know if I had it in me to give her that chance. The weight of her words hung in the air, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I stood abruptly, pacing the living room as the frustration bubbled inside me. "Do you even understand what you're asking of me?" I asked, my voice tight with emotion. "You're asking me to erase everything. Every lie, every secret, every betrayal. You're asking me to put my heart back into the hands that broke it." Emily sat silently, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to defend herself. "You talk about love like it's enough to fix this, but love isn't trust, Emily. Love isn't honesty. It's not the foundation, it's what we build on top of it. And you've already torn that foundation apart." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "You're right," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't undo what I've done. And I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything. But I need you to know that I'm willing to fight for us, even if it's just a sliver of hope. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I can be better." Her words sounded sincere, but sincerity felt like a cruel joke after everything that had happened. I wanted to scream, to shake her, and make her feel even an ounce of the pain I was carrying. But I knew it wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't erase the betrayal, and it wouldn't fix the broken pieces of our relationship. "I need time," I said finally, my voice flat. "I can't make any decisions right now. I don't even know how I feel, let alone what I want." She nodded, her shoulders sagging under the weight of my words. "Take all the time you need," she said softly. "I'll be here." Her willingness to wait didn't feel comforting. It felt suffocating. I wanted her to fight for us, but I also wanted her to understand that fighting wouldn't guarantee forgiveness. It wouldn't guarantee anything. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, retreating upstairs to the guest room that had become my refuge. Closing the door behind me, I leaned against it, letting the silence settle around me like a blanket. The following days passed in a blur. I stayed busy, throwing myself into work and avoiding Emily as much as I could. When we crossed paths in the kitchen or the hallway, the air between us was heavy with unspoken words. She tried a few times to initiate conversations, but I always shut her down. I wasn't ready, and I didn't know if I ever would be. One evening, as I sat in the guest room, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, a text came through from Matt. "How are you holding up?" I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. "I'm surviving. That's all I can say right now." His response was quick. "Come over this weekend. Let's grab a beer." I agreed, grateful for the distraction. When Saturday arrived, I drove to Matt's house, the radio turned low as my thoughts swirled. He greeted me at the door with a warm smile and a firm pat on the back. "You look like hell," he said, half joking. I chuckled dryly. "Feels about right." We sat on his back porch, The cool evening air a welcome relief from the suffocating tension at home. As we sipped our beers, Matt didn't push me to talk, and I appreciated that. After a while, though, the words began to spill out. I told him everything about the party, the video, the fight, and the unbearable uncertainty that followed. He listened intently, his expression a mix of sympathy and frustration on my behalf. "Man," he said finally, "I can't even imagine how you're dealing with this." "I'm not," I admitted. "I'm just existing, one day at a time." Matt nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. This is your call, and only you know what's right for you. But whatever you decide, make sure it's for you. Not for her, not for appearances, not for anyone else. You got to live with this, Tom. Make sure you can look in the mirror and be okay with the choice you made." His words hit me harder than I expected, and I nodded slowly. He was right. I couldn't let guilt or anger dictate my decision. This was my life, my heart, and it was up to me to protect it. I stayed at Matt's longer than I'd planned. The easy conversation and familiar company a balm for my frayed nerves. When I finally headed home, the house was dark, Emily already in bed. I was grateful for the reprieve, slipping quietly into the guest room without disturbing her. But as I lay there in the dark, Matt's words echoed in my mind. Make sure it's for you. What did I want? Did I want to fight for our marriage? Or was I ready to walk away? The answer felt elusive, buried under layers of hurt and confusion. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in limbo forever. At some point, I'd have to make a choice. The next morning, I woke with a sense of resolve I hadn't felt in weeks. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew I needed to start taking steps toward clarity. Over breakfast, I finally broke the silence with Emily. "We need to talk," I said, setting my coffee cup down. She looked up from her plate, her eyes wide with surprise. "Okay," she said cautiously. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I began, "and I still don't have all the answers. But I can't keep avoiding this. We need to figure out where we go from here. If we go anywhere at all." Her expression was a mix of hope and fear, and she nodded quickly. "Whatever you need, Tom. I'm here." Emily sat across from me, the kitchen table between us feeling like an unbridgeable chasm. "I've been thinking about everything," I started, the words heavier than I'd anticipated. "About us, about what happened, about what's left." Her hands gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "I know I broke your trust," she said softly. "And I know I can't fix that overnight. But I want to try, Tom. I want to be the woman you fell in love with again." Her voice cracked, and I looked away, unsure how to respond. "It's not that simple," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. "This isn't just about what you want. It's about what I can handle." The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Emily nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I understand," she whispered, "but I'm not giving up. I'll do whatever it takes, no matter how long it takes." Her determination felt both comforting and exhausting. I wanted to believe her, to believe that we could rebuild what had been broken. But I couldn't ignore the pain that still sat in my chest like a lead weight. "I need space," I said finally. "I can't figure this out with you hovering over me." She nodded again, her hands trembling as she folded them in her lap. "Take all the time you need," she said. "I'll be here when you're ready." The next few days were tense but quiet. Emily kept her distance, giving me the space I'd asked for, while I spent my time at work or out walking aimlessly through the neighborhood. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts a tangled mess. Part of me wanted to believe that we could make it work, that love could somehow overcome the betrayal. But another part of me, the part that replayed that video in my mind, knew it wouldn't be that easy. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I had the energy to even try. One evening, Matt called, his voice laced with concern. "How's it going?" he asked. "It's complicated," I admitted. He sighed. "It always is. Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but you've got to decide, Tom. Staying in limbo is only going to hurt you both." His words hit home, and I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "I know," I said. "I'm trying. It's just a lot." After we hung up, I sat on the couch, staring at the dark TV screen. He was right. I couldn't keep dragging this out. It wasn't fair to either of us. I needed to make a decision. The next morning, I woke with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I still didn't know if I could forgive Emily, but I knew I couldn't keep avoiding the conversation. Over coffee, I sat across from her and took a deep breath. "We need to figure out what's next," I said. Her eyes searched mine, hope flickering in their depths. "I'll do anything," she said. "Therapy, counseling, whatever you want. I just don't want to lose you, Tom." Her sincerity was obvious, but it didn't make the decision any easier. "I'm not ready to make any promises," I said carefully, "but I'm willing to try counseling. I think we owe it to ourselves to at least try." Emily's face crumpled with relief, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank you for giving us a chance." Her gratitude felt both genuine and overwhelming. I wasn't sure if this was the right decision, but it felt like the only one I could live with. Over the next few days, we made arrangements for counseling sessions, and though the atmosphere in the house was still tense, there was a glimmer of hope. But hope didn't erase the doubts that still gnawed at me. Every time I looked at Emily, I saw the woman I'd loved for years, and the woman who had betrayed me. Our first counseling session was awkward, to say the least. The therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Miller, asked us to share our perspectives on what had happened. Emily went first, her voice trembling as she described the loneliness she'd felt, the distance she believed had grown between us. "It's not an excuse," she said, glancing at me, "but it's the truth." When it was my turn, I spoke of the betrayal, the humiliation, and the trust that had been shattered. Dr. Miller listened patiently, her gentle guidance helping us navigate the tangled web of our emotions. By the end of the session, I felt emotionally drained but oddly lighter, as if speaking the truth had lifted a small part of the burden. The weeks that followed were a roller coaster. Some days felt almost normal, as if we were finding our way back to each other. Other days were filled with tension and doubt, the weight of what had happened threatening to pull us under. Counseling helped, but it didn't provide instant answers. Rebuilding trust was a slow and painful process, and there were moments when I wondered if it was even possible. Emily, for her part, was consistent in her efforts. She was open, honest, and patient, even when I struggled to meet her halfway. Her determination was admirable, but it also reminded me of how much she had to atone for. One evening, as we sat on the couch after a particularly emotional session, Emily turned to me, her eyes filled with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. "Do you think we can ever get back to what we had?" she asked quietly. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think we can try to build something new. It won't be the same, Emily. It can't be, but maybe it can still be something worth having." Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached for my hand. For the first time in months, I didn't pull away. As I sat there holding her hand, I realized that the road ahead would be long and uncertain. There were no guarantees, no promises that we would succeed. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Not for the life we'd had, but for the life we might still create. The wounds were still fresh, and the pain hadn't disappeared, but we were taking steps, tentative, fragile steps, towards something new. And for now, that was enough. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss interesting life stories, and write a comment if you like the story. See you.